Jess. So I'll hand you over to Jess.
Awesome. So as Simon said, my name's Jess, and I want to begin today by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Gosh, I'm already stumbling. The traditional custodians of the land which we meet today, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and future. So today I'm going to be talking to you about a subject I am super passionate about. I'm really excited to chat with you today about all things neuroscience, self-care and stress management. I think it's important to understand that we are never going to be able to get rid of stress out of our lives, and certain levels of stress can be beneficial. But my aim today is to give you a better understanding of your brain so that way you can understand how stress and anxiety can affect you and your colleagues. I want you to walk away understanding what stress is doing to your brain and your body, but also to have a good understanding of what you can do to combat it. So we're going to kick off this morning with neuroscience, and I'm going to break down the different sections of the brain and their functions and how the brain reacts under stress and anxiety. Then I'm going to speak about burnout, wellness and self-care. So this is not just going to be run a bubble bath, forget all your troubles. This is going to be more of an understanding of what chronic stress and burnout can look like and what you can do before you get to that stage, as well as a wellness wheel and a proper self-care plan. So the self-care plan is going to be a bit interactive, so feel free to make some notes during that. Then we're going to talk about stress management for your colleagues and your team members and how you can help people who are struggling. I want to focus on how we can create a mentally well working environment. We are going through collective stress right now, which has been ongoing for the last 18 months. So it's only natural for people to be struggling to cope at the moment or feeling like their usual daily tasks are so much harder to complete. Then we'll finish up with any questions you may have and wrap up. Oh. Sorry. Cool. So let's get started with the brain. This is the breakdown of the brain on the screen. Our brain is wired for survival, and this is a really important thing to remember as we learn more about the brain and the brain when it's stressed. What you can see on the slide is a detailed breakdown of the brain. I'm not going to go through every section of the brain, but there are some key areas I want to speak to you about. Today, I'm going to be speaking to you about the brain in 3 sections, which focuses on the neocortex, or the Homo sapien brain, the limbic system, or your mammalian brain, and the brainstem and the cerebellum, or your reptilian brain. So I want you to take your hand, place it at the back of your head. So this is where our reptilian brain is. Our reptilian brain includes the main structures found in a reptile's brain, the brainstem and the cerebellum. The brainstem is the first part of your brain to form as a fetus, and it connects the brain to the spinal cord and the rest of the body. It's a conduit for integrating the whole brain and is critical for central nervous system functioning, such as your heart rate, your respiration, your attention, and your consciousness. It also regulates the sleep cycle. The cerebellum is the next part that forms and is responsible for movement, senses, and language processing. This part of your brain remains largely unchanged throughout evolutionary history. The brainstem and the cerebellum are the first to develop as what keeps us alive without any conscious thought. You don't think about breathing 24/7 because your brainstem ensures that it's being done unconsciously. The next part of the brain is the limbic system, or the mammalian brain. This part of the brain evolved when we evolved from reptiles to mammals, and this is where the emotional experience sits. This is the unconscious and not the cognitive part of the brain. The mammalian brain is wrapped around the reptilian brain, and it's central to learning, memory, and emotion. All mammals have a similar brain to the mammalian brain. The limbic system is important to understand because this is the part of the brain that is activated when we're stressed. On this slide is the breakdown of the limbic system. This is where the HPA and the TAP axis sit. This part of the brain is important to understand as it's heavily affected through stress. To break down the HPA, the hypothalamus controls the hormones that affect sex, hunger, sleep, aggression, and other biological factors. The pituitary gland is a control gland that relates to the hypothalamus. It also influences growth, blood pressure, sexual functioning, the thyroid, and metabolism. The adrenal glands produce an all-important corticosteroid, including cortisol. Cortisol can be potentially damaging with too much stress, but it is also necessary for stimulating memory, as well as the neurotransmitter adrenaline. Adrenaline regulates your heart rate and the fight, flight, or freeze response. So think of your TAP as your CEO. It's connected to the neocortex and it makes high-level executive functioning decisions, who monitors the HPA, which is a little bit more of kind of your unpredictable team member who's really affected by outside environments. Another key part of the limbic system is the amygdala and the hippocampus. The hippocampus is our memory organ and works closely with the amygdala, distributing information throughout the brain for storage. Energy from the amygdala tells the hippocampus which information should be remembered. When there's not enough interest or energy, no memory is produced. So in contrast, a highly stressful event or continual stress can overwhelm the entire system and result in a destruction of your neurons and distressed memory. This is when new negative neural connections can be created. Have you ever wondered why when you're really stressed, you can't think properly? You can blame your hippocampus and your amygdala. The research shows us that's an importance of wellness and positive assets as we seek to develop and strengthen positive memories. So next I want you to put your hand on the front of your head. This is where your neocortex is located. This is the part of the brain that is incredibly important as it's associated with executive functioning such as abstract reasoning, decision-making, and problem solving. This is the part of your brain that is critical for long-term memory and emotional regulation through connections to the limbic system. This is where our conscious thought and self-awareness comes from. This is the very last part of your brain to be formed, and it actually takes quite a while. Your brain doesn't fully form until your mid to late 20s. So if you have people in your office that are under the age of 25 years old, they do not have a fully formed brain yet. So maybe we could be a tad nicer to them when they make some silly decisions. I want you to think of your brain as evolving the way that evolution has evolved. Our brain is wired to help keep us alive, so it's constantly evolved to do so. This means that as we've developed in a social society, we've needed more cognitive function. We started with our reptilian brain to keep us alive, and then our mammalian brain is what's kept us alive from lion attacks. And then our Homo sapien brain helps us cognitively function and is the difference between other mammals and humans. So when we're stressed, our brain senses immediate danger and can no longer think clearly using our high-level thinking part of our brain. So that's the breakdown of the brain and the different sections. Another really important function of the brain to understand is the neurons and the plasticity of the brain. Neurons are one of two main classes of cells in the brain. Neurons are the signaling unit of the nervous system that perform a relay function to communicate. There are different types of neurons, such as sensory neurons, motor neurons, mirror neurons, and interneurons. Every neuron has thousands of connections with other neurons across small spaces called synapses. The term brain plasticity, it refers to the recently discovered ability of the brain to change itself and to adapt to its environment by weakening or strengthening different synaptic connections. So what happens is the brain uses the neurons to create neural connections, which, when used repeatedly, form preferential pathways in the brain. If key pathways are blocked or we choose not to use them, the brain is able to recruit new neurons and form new pathways. Plasticity is the brain's capacity to make changes to these networks in order to learn to remember, to forget, to recover, and to restructure. So in simpler terms, when we're learning a new skill, our brain creates a pathway that helps it learn. If there's an issue with that pathway, it's able to adapt and change to the environment. By creating these neural connections and preferential pathways, this is what keeps our brain young and working. As we age, the plasticity of our brain becomes rigid. The brain is like a muscle and we want to keep it active by learning new skills. Once you've learned a skill, it no longer creates new neural pathways and therefore doesn't increase your brain's plasticity. Plasticity is responsible for the uniqueness in each of our brains. Now, the environment that we exist in changes the structure of our brain and our brain adapts to that environment. So things such as diet, stress, disease, addiction, aging, pollution, the amount of sleep that we get, and the social and cultural practices that we are exposed to all have an effect on our brains. The great part of this is our brain is wired to heal. The downside to this is that long-term effects of stress and anxiety can have a huge impact. So the parts of the brain that I've spoken about are going to become really important to understand as we see how the brain works under stress and what happens. So let's summarize, because that's a lot of information, a lot of dense information to take in early on a Tuesday morning. What I want you to remember at the back of your head is our reptilian brain, which hasn't changed through evolution and is what's found in reptiles and it's keeping us alive. Then we have our mammalian brain, which is what mammals have, and this is where stress comes from and where cortisol is produced. Then we have our neocortex, or the Homo sapien part of our brain, or the Homo sapien part of our brain. The CEO part of your brain that does all your critical thinking, which goes cloudy when we're stressed. Key functions of the brain are the neurons that create the pathways, and we want to constantly be learning new things to keep our brain plasticity high. So now let's talk about stress. What is stress? Stress is an involuntary physical and psychological response to a stressor. So there's a couple of things I want to note. You do not choose to be stressed. You just get stressed. It's something that happens in your body and your head, and it is always in response to a stressor. Now, stress isn't always a bad thing. Cortisol, the stress hormone, needs to be engaged to stimulate memory. And without stress, people are bored and disengaged. Optimal performance happens when there is enough arousal in the brain and the body to perform optimally. But what happens when there's too much stress? We can no longer perform and our brain goes into survival mode. As I said at the start, our brains are wired to help us survive. Now, there's different types of stress, chronic and acute. Acute stress is stress that only lasts for a short period of time. Stresses can include presenting, sitting an exam, starting a new job, giving a speech, or being paced with a deadline. This can occur in circumstances such as chronic stress is a stress that continues for a long period of time and does not go away. This can occur in circumstances such as ongoing financial difficulties, social isolation and loneliness, relationship problems, chronic health problems, caring for someone with complex needs, overwork and bullying, living in an unsafe environment, or when there's violence in the home, or an 18-month-long pandemic. Stress can be cumulative, which means that when a number of stresses occur at the same time, or one after another, and you haven't had the opportunity or time to recover, stress levels can rise and stay high. So maybe a pandemic with some health anxiety, on top of some financial stress, on top of homeschooling your kids, on top of social isolation, on top of relationship problems. I mean, we've all had moments in our life, especially over the last 18 months, where one small thing happens and it's okay and it's manageable, and then another stressful thing occurs, and then another and another, and it becomes harder and harder to cope. We are currently living in potentially the most stressful collective time in our lives. So what impact is that having on our brain and our bodies? Chronic stress can affect our brain size, the structure, its function, and right down to the level of our genes. So I want to go back to our HPA axis I was talking before. When your brain detects a stressful situation, the HPA axis is instantly activated and releases cortisol, so your body is ready for instant action. This was an evolutionary response from your brain from thousands of years ago, but unfortunately our society has evolved quicker than our brains have. The reason that cortisol is instantly released and your body is activated was to keep you safe from dangerous situations such as the lion attack. We may not be in dangerous situations such as a lion attacking us anymore, but when we have something that triggers that stress response, our brains still react in the same way. This means that a small amount of cortisol can be a good thing. However, high levels of cortisol wreak havoc on your brain and your body. When you are chronically stressed or feeling high levels of anxiety, your brain stops using its cognitive functions as much. So the front part of your brain, the neocortex or your CEO, those executive functions are not being used and your limbic system just kicks into gear. This means that all that high-level thought and critical thinking isn't working as well as it normally would. Chronic stress increases the activity level and the number of neural connections in the amygdala. As levels of cortisol rise, electric signals from your hippocampus deteriorate. The hippocampus also inhibits the activity of the HPA axis. So when it weakens, so does your ability to control stress. That's not all though. Constant cortisol will actually shrink your brain. When we have too much cortisol, it means that we have the loss of the synapses connections between the neurons, and it means there can be shrinking of that prefrontal cortex, which is the decision-making part of your brain. You're essentially losing the ability to make critical decisions and make judgments and concentrate longer term. More cortisol also leads to fewer new brain cells being made in the hippocampus. This means that chronic stress will make it harder for you to learn and remember new things. Effects such as memory loss, the inability to think clearly, and low immunity to disease and infection are all symptoms of long-term stress. It's not just cognitive function and your immunity that is impaired. It can also make people more emotional or dramatic about things that normally wouldn't be such a big deal. And it isn't just your brain that's affected by stress. It's your entire body, especially under long-term stress. Too much cortisol means too much adrenaline, which affects your nerves, your blood pressure, your gut health, and your heart. If this continues, it can really set the stage for burnout and more serious illnesses such as depression, heart disease, digestive issues, and eventually Alzheimer's disease. So chronic stress is not sounding great to our bodies and our brains, but if it's left unresolved, it can lead to burnout. Burnout and stress are closely linked, but are not the same thing. As I've said, small doses of stress can be good for us. However, long-term chronic stress leads to burnout. Burnout can be referred to as a state of physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual depletion, characterized by a feeling of helplessness and hopelessness. Burnout is an indication that a career or a lifestyle is unsustainable, as it demonstrates undesirable aspects and an inability to move forward without change. Have you ever felt like long-term stress is preventing you from taking part in activities you normally find meaningful? This is burnout. Signs of burnout can include feeling exhausted and unable to perform basic tasks, losing motivation for different aspects of your life, including your work and your friendships, unable to focus or concentrate, feeling empty or lacking in emotion, passion, and drive, experiencing conflict in your personal relationships, as well as your relationships with your co-workers, and withdrawing emotionally from friends and family. When you reach burnout, it can feel like you've had the life sucked out of you, and you no longer feel capable of caring about anything that's important to you. This is because your body is being constantly flooded with cortisol and adrenaline that it shuts down the other functions to cope. But it is not all doom and gloom. There is no need to stress about your levels of stress. Our brains are wired to heal and survive, and the beauty of brain plasticity means that you can create new neural pathways to learn to cope better with your stress. That's the good news. We can do things about this, and having tools to effectively manage your stress and anxiety is one of the most important skills to learn. All right, so let's talk about mental health and wellness. The World Health Organization defines health as a complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease. This means that the absence of a mental illness does not equal being well. I really want this to sink in, that just because you aren't diagnosed with anxiety or depression or another mental illness does not mean that you're mentally well and thriving. So how do we tell if we're just getting by? And how do we get to be thriving? So first, let's ask ourselves some questions. Are we getting 7 to 8 hours sleep at night? Are we going to bed at a consistent time and waking up at a similar time every day? Are we eating well? Are we exercising and moving our bodies on a regular basis? Or are we overindulging in alcohol, drugs, or caffeine? Do we have time in our schedules to chill the hell out and lay around on the couch and just process stuff? I think you know by answering those questions if you're just getting by or not. So how can we have better well-being? It's about fostering self-awareness and learning to have strategies in place to deal with stressful situations when they arise. You want these strategies to cover all aspects of wellness. And this is a self-care plan. Why should you have a self-care plan? I am very glad you've asked. You need a self-care plan because, as we spoke about, your brain doesn't cope well when it's stressed, and you lose the ability to think clearly. If you already have a detailed self-care plan that covers all aspects of wellness, you can use this when you're feeling stressed without a lot of critical thinking involved. So what are the different aspects of wellness? On the slide, you've got the wellness wheel, and this covers all aspects of overall well-being. Each different facet of wellness can be interconnected with each other, and by focusing on one or two key areas, this can have an improvement to your overall well-being. I'm going to break down these areas step by step and explain how we create a self-care plan around these. This is where I'd encourage you to grab a pen and paper or make some notes and create your own self-care plan while we do this. Under each area of wellness, jot down some ideas of what you can do that helps make you feel good under each heading. Okay, let's start with social. Social wellness is developing a sense of connection and belonging and a well-developed support system. It focuses on building and nurturing meaningful and supportive relationships with not just individuals, but groups and communities. A strong social network is important, as studies have shown that people with stronger relationships have a highest chance of survival from different health conditions like cancer. Having meaningful relationships isn't just about having a lot of mates that you can have a bit of a chat with. It's about having relationships with people where you are enabled to create boundaries that encourage communication, trust, and conflict management. Social wellness is about having respect for others, other cultures, and yourself. In this current climate, with so many of us feeling socially isolated from friends and family, it's even more important. So how can you foster better social well-being and incorporate that into a self-care plan? Reflect on yourself and your social needs. What aspects of your social life do you enjoy? What parts would you like to improve? Ensure that you're making an effort to keep in touch with friends, family, and your colleagues. This can be hard at the moment with COVID when we spend all day looking at screens. So find a way that works for you. It could be calling a friend for a chat as you go for a walk, or perhaps you can join a club or an organisation, volunteer in the community. A great way is to combine different aspects of wellness in the one task. So joining a sporting group or exercising with a friend enables your social and physical well-being. What everyone does for their own care is going to be different for everyone, and it's important to find what works for you. Next is our emotional wellness. This is being able to cope effectively with life and creating satisfying relationships. It develops awareness and an understanding and an acceptance of your emotions and your response to everyday interactions. This self-awareness allows you to better understand why you're feeling a certain way, and you can actively respond to your feelings. Being emotionally well doesn't necessarily mean that you're happy all the time, but rather that you're self-aware and able to shift as a way to feel better. People that have strong emotional wellness are generally able to handle stressful situations better, as they have the self-awareness to be able to acknowledge their feelings and act sooner than those that don't. And as we remember, our brains don't like being overstressed. So the good news is I'm going to tell you how you can foster better emotional wellness. Your self-care plan that we're creating right now is the perfect way to foster better emotional wellness. It means you've got strategies in place to be able to help you when life gets overwhelming. Another fantastic tool is therapy. The best way to access therapy is through EAP or speaking to a bulk billing doctor who can put you onto a mental health plan for free or discounted sessions. Therapy helps you develop your self-awareness around your emotions and gives you personalized help in overcoming difficult situations, or just better understand who you are as a person and why you do what you do. Journaling can be another great way of reflecting to foster better self-awareness, or just taking time out for yourself to sit and reflect. Another way to improve your emotional well-being is sharing your thoughts and your feelings with someone that you trust. With this person, engage in open and honest conversation about the way that you feel and ensure that you listen to their emotions too. This is where emotional and social well-being overlap. It's important for emotional well-being that we practice daily gratitude and self-compassion. Let's be as kind to ourselves as we are to others. We would never berate someone for a tiny mistake. So why do so many of us do it to ourselves constantly over a mistake that just isn't that big of a deal? I know many of my friends that have anxious tendencies tend to do this to themselves, especially in regards to work. But the more we work on fostering our emotional well-being, the more we can move away from that spiral of self-hatred after a really human thing of making a mistake. Let's move on to our spiritual wellness. Spiritual wellness, which means expanding our sense of purpose and meaning in life. Spiritual wellness doesn't mean religion, although it can if people are religious and put their religious practices in this section of wellness and healthcare. But it's really about tuning into our inner selves. It's about finding meaning in life events and define our individual purpose. Spirituality can stem from beliefs, faith, values, ethics, or moral principles that provide purpose and direction in our lives. A healthy spirit can help us remain resilient and better prepared to face life's challenges. So how do we include spiritual wellness into self-care? Get in touch with who you are. Take the time to really explore your inner self. You can do this through meditation or practicing mindful relaxation. Meditation and taking a step back and just intentionally belly breathing is one of the best things that you can do for your stressed brain because it involves really calming down the central nervous system. I know everyone tells you to just stop and take a breath, but it actually really does wonders for your body and your brain. Deep belly breathing causes your body to signal to your nervous system to lower your heart rate, your blood pressure, and your cortisol levels. Another way to foster spiritual and emotional wellness is to practice acceptance. By practicing acceptance, you are showing yourself compassion and accepting who you are right now and knowing that that is okay. One of the best pieces of advice I've ever been given was from my therapist, who said that good self-worth is knowing who you are, the good and the bad parts, and accepting that. You do not need radical self-love, but just by showing yourself acceptance, you are showing yourself compassion and love. Let's move on to intellectual wellness, which is recognizing creative abilities and finding ways to expand knowledge and skills. Our intellectual wellness encourages us to engage in creative and mentally stimulating activities, and it requires lifelong learning and curiosity. Intellectual wellness can be developed through academics, cultural involvement, community involvement, and personal hobbies that expand your knowledge and skills while allowing you to share your knowledge and skills with others. I'm sure I'm not the only one who started a hobby in lockdown. Anyone else make a sourdough last year? The best part of increasing our intellectual wellness is that it is fantastic for our brain's plasticity. By constantly learning new skills, we ensure that our brain continues to create new neural pathways, and this prevents our brain from becoming rigid. Step one to fostering intellectual wellness is being open-minded, curious, and actively listening. When you participate in active listening, you're able to fully comprehend the information that is being given to you and learn something new. So I hope we're all using our active listening skills right now. Try and always be curious. If you're interested in how someone has made something, why not take a lesson? Always wanted to learn to dance? Take a class. It's also a great way to increase your social wellness by doing a class or engaging in an online discussion about your new hobby. There's so many opportunities to learn new skills for free on YouTube. Learning to paint or draw is a fantastic way to learn new skills and stimulate the brain. There are so many Bob Ross tutorials on YouTube that you can follow along to, and art therapy is a great way to combat stressful situations. The beauty of doing a Bob Ross tutorial is that you don't make a mistake, it's just a happy little accident. Following on from the wise Bob Ross, not only is learning new skills great for your brain, but it's also getting you comfortable with failure. Everyone's a little bit shit when they first try something new. And the more that you try new things, the more comfortable you are with being a bit crap at the start. A lot of people may ask you, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? But just do it anyway and accept that failing at something is a way of learning and keeping our brains working. My housemate and I have been learning to make polymer clay earrings during lockdown. And when we started, we were absolutely awful. But every time we'd make a mistake, we'd call it a learning and guaranteed to make it better the next time. This attitude of accepting the mistakes links back to having good emotional wellness. So let's chat about physical wellness, which is all about recognizing the need for physical activity, diet, sleep, and nutrition. Having good physical wellness is the ability to maintain a quality of life that allows you to get most out of your daily activities without undue fatigue or physical stress. Physical wellness recognizes that our daily habits and behaviors have an impact on our overall health, well-being, and quality of life. What's important to note with physical wellness is that you don't need to be pushing yourself in a HIIT class at the gym to get the benefits of good physical wellness. Studies have shown that even low-impact physical activity, such as yoga, stretching, or swimming, can still increase psychological well-being, which will reduce the symptoms of stress and burnout. Personally, I love to play netball. It means that I can hit multiple areas of wellness in the one task. Change up my netball position regularly, so I'm learning new ways to play. I've built friendships through netball. I'm outside in a nice environment, and I'm being physically active. It's a great way to show how multiple areas of wellness can be interconnected. So how can you include physical wellness in your self-care plan? Eat foods that make you feel good. It's important to eat food that you enjoy, but also food that nourishes your body so that you can incorporate movement that you enjoy. Shaking your body out and ecstatic dance is actually proven to regulate our nervous system. And by regulating our nervous system, we are calming it down and reducing our adrenaline and cortisol levels. This is a great thing to do when you're feeling anxious. It can literally feel like you're shaking the anxiety out of your body, and it really helps you to calm down. Having good physical wellness is all about being tuned into your body. Understand how it feels when it's good and when it's bad. And as much as we've heard it all before, get plenty of consistent sleep. It's important because when we rest and recharge, it allows our brain to function at peak capacity. Another part of your self-care plan for your physical health could be to reduce your intake of alcohol and caffeine or quitting smoking. It's important to build healthy habits to ensure you don't have to use a lot of critical thinking when you're stressed. Environmental wellness is incorporating good health by occupying pleasant, stimulating environments that support well-being. Environmental wellness also can refer to leading a lifestyle that values the relationship between ourselves, our community, and the environment. The core principle of environmental wellness is respect for all nature and all species living in it. To incorporate this into your self-care plan, especially during lockdown, is to get outside into nature as often as you can. I personally don't have a garden, but I try to get to a quiet park to walk around, and just by breathing in fresh air really helps. Another key part of incorporating this plan is to ensure that you have a clean space in your home. Clutter in your house, and especially clutter in your workspace, as we all work from home, can increase your stress and anxiety. This can be as simple as a 5-minute tidy at the end of your workday to ensure that your workspace is clear for the next day. Another way to increase your environmental wellness is to have a digital detox. It might work for you to have an afternoon every week where you unplug and go for a walk or read a book or do something that helps you relax in your environment. Studies have shown that the benefits of having time away from screens include less anxiety, better sleep, increased productivity, and overall better health. Financial wellness. Financial wellness is the satisfaction with current and future financial situations. It involves the process of learning how to successfully manage financial expenses. Money plays a critical role in our lives, and it can really impact your mental health. Financial stress and anxiety plays a huge role in our overall stress levels. A study in 2018 found that 2.44 million Australians were financially stressed, and I can only imagine that this has increased with COVID. Financial stress can have a huge impact on your personal relationships and is a main cause of argument and stress in couples. It does not matter how much money you're making, financial stress can impact everyone. As this is such a cause of stress, it's great to have a plan to combat it. So what does improving your financial wellness look like? Is it paying off, or is it having a weekly budget and sticking to it? Or are you going to create a savings account and have an automatic payment scheduled? Or you can do what I've been doing lately and asking myself, do I want this or do I want some serotonin just before I purchase anything online? The National Debt Hotline is a great place to start for some free resources to help guide you on being able to build a budget or give clear understanding of what you need to do when you've overspent or an unplanned expense pops up. By having clear goals and being able to identify any problems that may arise and have possible solutions. Psychologist Gary Kling calls this a pre-mortem. So we all know a post-mortem is when people try and figure out what's gone wrong. Well, a pre-mortem is what you do when you look ahead and try and figure out all the things that can go wrong. And then you try and figure out what you can do to prevent that from happening or minimizing the damage. Now, you can do this with any decision that needs a rational assessment of the facts, but I think it fits in really well with financial decision making. A pre-mortem understands that when you're stressed, you're not at your best and your thinking is going to be cloudy. So put some systems in place to help. A self-care plan is like a pre-mortem, but I think sitting down and working out what could go wrong financially and how to best cover that is an important part of avoiding financial stress for anyone. Finally, we have occupational wellness. This is a personal satisfaction and enrichment derived from your work. Occupational wellness allows you to find a career that you can feel fulfilled with. This dimension of well-being recognizes the importance of satisfaction, enrichment, and meaning through work. This doesn't always need to be your paid day job either. You could enrich your occupational wellness through volunteering in something that you're passionate about. It could be exploring different career opportunities that arise, setting realistic career goals and working towards those. It could be practicing open communication and proper conflict management with your colleagues. Occupational wellness could mean having a really good work-life balance. I'm sure I'm not the only one who struggles to switch off after a finished work, especially with everything being on our phones and easily being able to jump back onto the computer, just quickly do one more thing. Or maybe you're someone who struggles to switch off your emails off your phone while you're on annual leave or personal leave. It's important to ensure that we can derive meaning from the work that we do, which can be paid or unpaid, but also that we have a good balance of work and leisure. Incorporating this into a self-care plan can look like strong boundaries of removing notifications from work emails off your phone after you finished work, or studying something new to be able to move forward into a new career. It's also ensuring that you can have open and honest conversations with your managers and your colleagues. There's a reason that there's been a big push for companies to foster a culture of having employees be able to turn up to work as their true selves. This is to foster more occupational wellness and reduce workplace stress. As you can see, the wellness wheel really tackles areas in your life where you can get stressed, but also areas that help us manage that stress. With this self-care plan, you need to think to yourself, what in each area can I do that will help me self-soothe when I'm feeling stressed? What can be my go-to strategies that can help me calm down my central nervous system when I'm feeling overwhelmed? Once you have this, it's important to then use it. Cultivate your self-awareness and your understanding of how you mentally and physically feel. This isn't something that happens overnight. You don't need to instantly know how to better handle your stress after creating a plan. But what you can do is slowly and become more and more aware and come back to this plan and create those new neural pathways. So by now, I hope you understand what happens in your brain and when you're stressed and different ways to combat that stress when it arises. Let's talk about what could cause workplace stress specifically. How many of these hit home with you? They are stresses specifically for the workplace. They include working long hours or overtime, working through breaks or taking work home, doing shift work, time pressure, working too hard or too fast, unrealistic targets, having limited control over how you do your work, limited input into broader decisions by the business, not receiving enough support from supervisors, managers, or co-workers, job insecurity, high mental task demands, work that requires high-level decision-making, a lack of role clarity, poor communication, conflict with colleagues or managers, bullying, low levels of recognition and reward. There are so many different stresses that can affect people, and it's important to understand this and remember back to what is stress. It's something that happens to us involuntarily. So why do we need a healthy workforce? Because in a study conducted by Gallup, 76% of people, of full-time employees that were surveyed, reported feeling burnout always, quite often, or sometimes. And it is not just people's working lives that are affected when they're stressed or burnt out. Their family responsibilities become harder to manage as well. This isn't just me saying that we should strive for a more mentally healthy environment. Employees care about mental health in the workplace. Research shows that it's important to employees as a reason to stay with their current employer, but also what they are looking for in their next employer. Research from PricewaterhouseCoopers has shown that for every dollar that you spend creating a mentally healthy workplace, on average results in a positive return of investment. The benefits can include more productivity from your team and a reduction in absentee and compensation claims. I'm also just taking note of the time. I'm probably just going to go about 5 minutes over if that's okay. So you may think to yourself, yes, I want to create a more awareness around mental health in the business, either as a leader or as a team member. But what does that look like? A mentally healthy workplace is one that promotes workplace practices that support positive mental health, eliminates and minimizes psychological health and safety risks through identification and assessment of psychosocial hazards. It builds the knowledge and skills and capabilities of workers to be resilient and thrive at work. It's free of stigma and discrimination, and it supports the recovery of workers returning after a physical or psychological injury. So how do we ensure that we're including mental health in all aspects of our work? I want to direct you to Heads Up, which has fantastic resources. Heads Up was developed by Beyond Blue and supported by the Mentally Healthy Workplace Alliance, which was established by the National Mental Health Commission. They have free resources about encouraging business leaders and everyone in the workplace to play their part in creating a mentally healthy working environment. I think using a tool like an action plan from Heads Up is a great way to bring mental health to the forefront of your organisation. Something like a mental health action plan can help you and your team identify priority areas. As part of the action plan, it helps identify how your business and your team are doing across priority areas, those including awareness and stigma, support for staff with mental health conditions, and specific risk factors that can affect the mental health of employees. This will give you a personalised plan based on your answers and gives you resources to focus on specific areas in your workplace. One of the best tools that you can use as a manager to help manage the stress of your team is learning mindfulness together. Becoming more mindful literally changes different aspects of your brain, and studies show that teams who train their brains to develop mindfulness collaborate better, navigate stress more effectively, and sustain high performance. Empathy and compassion significantly improve employee performance, engagement, and profitability. It does not cost anything to be kind, and the benefits are fantastic. A research project at UNSW found that the single greatest influence on profitability and productivity within an organisation is the ability of leaders to spend more time and effort developing and recognising their people, welcoming feedback, including criticism, and fostering cooperation among staff. Additionally, the research found that the ability of a leader to be compassionate, that is to understand the people's motivators, hopes, and difficulties, and to create this right support mechanism to allow people to be as good as they can be, has the greatest correlation with profitability and productivity. Empathy and compassion are good for people and good for business. Let's go back to the brain for a minute and link all of this together. Have you ever had someone tell you an emotional story where they're crying and you're starting to tear up yourself? Or have you got colleagues that are really stressed and you work closely with them and then you become really stressed? A way that this happens is through mirror neurons, and this is what helps us have empathy. We have lots of different types of neurons, but mirror neurons specifically work by allowing us to feel what another person is feeling. The brain is wild with the way that it works. We've evolved as social creatures who live and work together and need to be together to survive, so our brains have helped us understand how the other person feels. The reason that mirror neurons are important for us all to understand is that you can use this as a way to help your colleagues when they're feeling stressed, but also to recognize that your stress or others' external stress could be affecting the team. It's important to have your own self-awareness and manage your own stress to be able to help your team. I know it's possibly been a while since we've all been on a plane, but can you remember the instructions of needing to put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you can help anyone else? This still counts with our mental health. It's important to understand how our behaviours can affect our team members and how your stress can be passed over to your team. The positive of this is when we have good well-being, this can positively spread throughout the workplace. It's important to model healthy behaviours and prioritise actions that promote well-being for yourself and your team. So what's the big takeaway from this section? Think about you and your team's mental health and stress levels, and include things like offering personal development tools like mindfulness or resilience training. Explicitly encourage people to take time for exercise or other physical activities such as walking meetings. Ensure that lunch breaks are taken. Studies show that lots of breaks away from work can be just as beneficial as one big break. Or build buffer time into projects so that people can work flexibly and at a manageable pace. Especially in this current climate, it's even more important to ensure that you are understanding your team members' needs and how they are feeling. As I've spoken about, stress is something that just happens to you and you can't control it. So having an understanding that your team members can't control when they get stressed out, but work together so that we can all have tools to work through it. Overall, it's about encouraging your team members and your colleagues to become more self-aware. The more aware we are of our emotions and our behaviours and our stress levels, the better we are at managing it. Having a mentally well workforce gives nothing but positives back to the company and the society that we live in. The more we can strive to work together towards better mental health, the better off we're all going to be. Let's make sure that when we notice the team member is stressed or has high levels of anxiety, the best thing that we can do is speak to them and approach with kindness and care. Remember that their brain isn't functioning at its normal capacity and their thinking has become cloudy and their judgment's impaired. Allow the person space to be able to talk with yourself or a professional if needed. The key takeaway for managers from a mental health perspective for your employees is to understand that when they have stresses going on, they cannot work at the capacity that they will normally be working at because the executive function of their brain is too cloudy. And the more stressed a person becomes, the worse their cognitive function becomes. The best thing that you can do is to support them is try and limit the stresses or slightly decrease their workload and help increase their coping mechanisms. Once they're able to fully work through the stress, they'll be able to think clearly and return to full capacity. So look, I know that this has been a lot of information over a morning coffee. So I want to have some pieces of information to take with you throughout your day. Our brains are amazing and adaptive, but long-term levels of stress are incredibly damaging. Cultivate self-awareness to know when you're feeling stressed and have a plan in place for when you get stressed that you can go to that'll help make you feel better. It's important for your self-care to hit lots of areas of wellness for overall well-being. On the slide, I've included some free resources that can help you in all aspects of wellness to help you get started. And for managers and for colleagues, the best thing you can do for your team when they're feeling stressed is show kindness and empathy, and we can work together to create a more mentally healthy workplace. Thanks. That's me.
That was awesome.
Cheers, Jess.
That's great.
Sorry, I'm going to be
That's
really
amazing.
Very
Amazing.
there, mate.